The Galactic Assembly Chamber fell silent as High Arbiter Velmos of the Karathi Collective raised his forearms in a gesture of grave concern. His silver-scaled skin reflected the ambient light of 1,000 holographic displays, each showing tactical data from the Outer Rim conflict that had consumed the attention of every civilized species for the past 3 cycles. The Draxian hegemony has breached the neutral zone, Velmos announced, his voice carrying through the vast amphitheater where representatives of 47 species sat in varying states of alarm. Their fleet numbers in the thousands. Our combined forces cannot match them. Ambassador Yithkov the Morvani, a being of pure crystalline structure that hummed with bioluminescent energy, flickered an urgent shade of crimson. What of the Coalition's plasma batteries, the Vorkin particle weapons? Ineffective against Draxian shielding, came the grim reply from General Korthax, whose beetle-like carapace gleamed beneath the chamber lights. Their energy absorption technology renders our weapons useless. We calculate 17% efficiency at best. A murmur of despair rippled through the assembled delegates. The Draxian hegemony had spent centuries perfecting their defensive systems, and now their expansion had brought them to the doorstep of civilized space. Every energy-based weapon in the galactic arsenal had been tried and found wanting against their adaptive shields. It was then that a new voice cut through the gloom, a voice speaking through the universal translator with an accent the system struggled to process. If I may, High Arbiter. Every eye, sensor, and perceptive organ in the chamber turned toward the small delegation from Earth. The humans had only joined the Galactic Assembly 18 months ago, their faster-than-light capability, a recent development that had surprised the established powers. They were considered primitives by most standards, their technology a curious mix of the innovative and the barbaric. Commander Daniel Hayes stood at his delegation's podium, his uniform crisp despite the tension visible in his shoulders. Beside him, Dr. Maria Santos clutched a data tablet, her dark eyes scanning the tactical displays with an intensity that several alien observers found unsettling. "The human delegation wishes to speak," Velmos inquired, his tone carrying the patronizing note that humans had grown accustomed to in galactic politics. "We appreciate your enthusiasm for participation, Commander Hayes, but I fear this matter requires solutions beyond your species' current capabilities." Hayes maintained his composure, though Dr. Santos's jaw tightened slightly. "With respect, High Arbiter, I believe we may have a solution that your analysts have overlooked." General Korthax's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. "The humans, they still use chemical propellants in their atmospheric craft. What could they possibly offer against Draxian shields?" "Something you abandoned long ago," Hayes replied, his voice steady. "Something you all forgot." He nodded to Dr. Santos, who activated her tablet. A new holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing technical schematics that made several of the more technologically sophisticated delegates lean forward in confusion. "What am I looking at?" Ambassador Yithka asked, the confusion evident in the orange pulses traveling through his crystalline form. "A railgun," Dr. Santos answered, stepping forward to manipulate the hologram. Specifically, the Mark VII Gauss accelerator, currently deployed on our newest warship, the Spirit of Liberty. It uses electromagnetic fields to accelerate a solid projectile to approximately 7 kilometers per second. The chamber erupted in confused chatter. Velmos raised his arms for silence, his expression one of bewilderment. "You propose to fight the Draxians with kinetic weapons, projectiles." Commander Hayes, the galaxy moved beyond such primitive armaments millennia ago. "Did you?" Hayes asked. "Or did you simply assume that energy weapons were superior and never looked back?" "Energy weapons are superior," Korthax insisted. "They travel at light speed. They require no ammunition. They can be calibrated for different targets. And they can be absorbed, deflected, or dissipated by the right shielding," Dr. Santos countered. "That's exactly what the Draxians have done. They've built their entire defensive doctrine around energy absorption. Their shields convert incoming energy into power for their systems. The harder you hit them with plasma or particle beams, the stronger they become. She zoomed in on a portion of the schematic. But a kinetic projectile isn't energy in the way their shields process it. It's mass. It's momentum. And there's no elegant technological solution for a tungsten slug traveling at a significant fraction of orbital velocity impacting your hull. The chamber fell quiet again, but this time the silence had a different quality. General Korthax's mandibles had stopped clicking. Ambassador Yith-Ka's form had shifted to a contemplative shade of deep blue. "You're suggesting," Velmo said slowly, "that the Draxians have no defense against physical projectiles." "Not none," Hayes admitted. "They have armor like everyone else, but their shields are designed to handle energy weapons because that's what everyone uses. They've never needed to develop countermeasures against kinetic attacks because no one in the galaxy uses them anymore. Why would they? Energy weapons are cleaner, more elegant, more civilized." "Civilized," Dr. Santos added with a slight smile, "but predictable." Velmos exchanged glances with his fellow arbiters. "Even if what you say is true, Commander, one human warship cannot defeat a fleet of thousands." "One ship, no," Hayes agreed. "But we're not proposing to fight them alone. We're proposing a demonstration. Show the Assembly that kinetic weapons work against Draxian defenses, and then we share the technology. Every shipyard in the Coalition can produce railguns. The physics aren't complicated. What's complicated is convincing a galaxy of energy weapon enthusiasts to remember that sometimes the old ways still work." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some delegates dismissed the human proposal as the desperate gambit of a primitive species trying to seem relevant. Others pointed out that kinetic weapons had their own limitations, that they were slower, that they required ammunition, that they were difficult to aim at extreme ranges. But as the tactical analyses continued, a troubling pattern emerged. The Draxian shields that had proved impenetrable to every Coalition weapon really did show vulnerability to kinetic impacts. The physics was undeniable. Energy could be absorbed or redirected, but mass in motion carried momentum that had to go somewhere. Finally, High Arbiter Velmos called for a vote. The human delegation proposes a field demonstration against Draxian forces, all in favor of authorizing this action. The vote was close. Closer than Hayes had hoped, but in the end, the desperation of the Assembly won out over their skepticism. The humans would have their chance. 3 days later, Commander Hayes stood on the bridge of the Spirit of Liberty, watching the void of space stretch out before him. The ship was small by galactic standards, a mere 400 meters of angular gray metal that looked positively archaic next to the elegant curves of Coalition vessels. But beneath that utilitarian exterior lay something that no one in the galaxy expected. "Draxian Patrol Group detected," announced Lieutenant Kevin Brooks from the sensor station. His voice was steady, but Hayes could see the tension in his shoulders. 6 vessels, standard configuration. They're moving to intercept." "Good," Hayes replied. "That's exactly what we wanted." Behind them, a small flotilla of Coalition observer ships hung at what they considered a safe distance. Their sensors were recording everything, ready to transmit the results back to the Assembly. Some of those observers, Hayes knew, were expecting to watch the Spirit of Liberty destroyed. Others were hoping for a miracle. Dr. Santos worked at the tactical station, her fingers flying across the interface. Railgun capacitors at full charge, targeting solutions plotted for all 6 hostiles. "We're ready." "Communications from the lead Draxian vessel," reported Ensign Patricia Cole from her station. "They're demanding we identify ourselves and state our intentions." Hayes nodded. "Tell them we're from Earth. Tell them we're here to discuss terms." Cole raised an eyebrow but transmitted the message. The response came quickly, dripping with contempt even through the translator. "The Draxian hegemony does not negotiate with primitive species. Surrender your vessel or be destroyed." "They're powering weapons," Brooks reported. "Particle beams charging. They'll be in range in 30 seconds." Hayes took a deep breath. This was the moment. Everything humanity had worked for, everything they hoped to prove, came down to the next few minutes. "Helm hold position. Weapons target the lead vessel." "Target locked," Dr. Santos confirmed. "Fire." The The spirit of liberty shuddered as the railgun discharged. There was no beam of light, no spectacular energy burst. Just a slight vibration through the hull as electromagnetic forces hurled a 20-kilogram tungsten slug into the void at 7 kilometers per second. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The Draxian ships continued their approach, their shields shimmering with the characteristic blue glow of active energy absorption. On the observer vessels, sensors tracked the projectile's path with growing confusion. What were the humans doing? Had their weapon misfired? Then the slug hit. The lead Draxian vessel's shields flickered but didn't stop the projectile. They weren't designed to. The tungsten slug punched through the energy barrier like it wasn't there, its kinetic energy far beyond anything the shield generators could process. It struck the hull traveling at nearly 7,000 meters per second, and the results were catastrophic. The kinetic energy transfer created an explosion that ripped through the Draxian ship from bow to stern. Secondary detonations followed as the impact ruptured fuel lines and power conduits. In less than 3 seconds, the vessel that had demanded humanity's surrender was nothing but expanding debris. On the observer ships, there was stunned silence. On the Spirit of Liberty, there was controlled urgency. "Reload," Hayes ordered. "Target the next vessel." "Reloading. 5 seconds to ready." The remaining Draxian ships had stopped their advance. Hayes could almost imagine the confusion on their bridges. Their sensors would be telling them impossible things. Their tactical doctrine had no response to what had just happened. For generations, they had relied on their shields to make them invincible. Now, in an instant, that invincibility had been shattered by a weapon technology they had dismissed as obsolete. "They're retreating," Brooks announced, disbelief evident in his voice. "All 5 vessels are withdrawing at maximum speed." Hayes allowed himself a small smile. "Let them go. They'll report back to their commanders, and that report will do more damage than we ever could by destroying them." "Commander," Cole said, her voice tight with barely suppressed excitement, "we're receiving transmissions from the observer fleet. They want to talk, all of them." Back at the Galactic Assembly, the recording of the battle played on every display. Delegates watched in stunned silence as a single human warship accomplished what entire coalition fleets had failed to achieve. The destruction of the Draxian vessel was replayed again and again, analyzed from every angle, its implications debated with growing urgency. High Arbiter Velmos addressed the chamber, his silver scales now tinged with something that might have been embarrassment. "It appears we owe the human delegation an apology, and perhaps more importantly, we owe them our attention." Commander Hayes, now present via holographic link from the Spirit of Liberty, nodded graciously. "No apology necessary, High Arbiter. We understand the skepticism. Humanity is new to galactic affairs, and our technology must seem primitive by your standards." "Primitive," General Korthax repeated, his mandibles clicking slowly. "I'm not sure that word means what I thought it meant. Commander, how long have your people been developing these railguns?" "The concept dates back to the early 20th century on our world. We've been refining the technology for military applications for about 80 years. 80 years, Ambassador Yithcom mused, his form pulsing with thoughtful shades of purple. While we were perfecting energy weapons, you were perfecting something we had forgotten could work. Not forgotten, Dr. Santos interjected. Dismissed. There's a difference. Our research into your technological history shows that most spacefaring species experimented with kinetic weapons early in their development, then abandoned them when energy weapons became practical. The assumption was that energy weapons were simply better. An assumption the Draxians exploited, Hayes added. They built their entire defensive doctrine around it. And why wouldn't they? Every species they encountered used the same weapons, followed the same technological path, until they met us. Velmos leaned forward. You're suggesting this isn't just about weapons. You're suggesting it's about how we think. Hayes nodded. Human history is full of examples of supposedly obsolete technologies finding new applications. We never completely abandon anything that works. We just set it aside until we find a new use for it. When we encountered the galactic community and saw that energy weapons were universal, our first question wasn't how to build better energy weapons. It was why everyone had stopped using kinetics. And when you couldn't find a good reason, Korthax finished, you decided to see what would happen. Something like that. The implications of this conversation would ripple through galactic society for years to come. The Draxian hegemony, suddenly aware that their invincible shields were anything but, sued for peace within a month. Coalition shipyards began retooling to produce railguns, a technology so simple that even the most basic industrial facilities could manufacture them. But the greater impact was philosophical. The galactic community had grown complacent, following technological paths laid down by their predecessors without questioning why. The humans, newcomers with no preconceptions about how things should be done, had looked at the galaxy's problems with fresh eyes and found solutions hiding in plain sight. 6 months after the demonstration, Commander Hayes received an invitation to address the Galactic Academy of Sciences. He stood before an audience of the galaxy's brightest minds, beings who had once dismissed humanity as primitive, and spoke words that would be quoted for generations. In human history, we have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention, but I'd like to propose a corollary. Assumption is the enemy of innovation. Every time you assume something can't be done, or shouldn't be done, or has already been done better, you close a door that might have led somewhere remarkable. He paused, looking out at the assembled scientists, diplomats, and military officers. Humanity didn't defeat the Draxians because we're smarter or stronger or more advanced. We defeated them because we asked a question no one else thought to ask. What if the old ways still work? What if the path not taken leads somewhere interesting? The galaxy is vast and its challenges are many. We face threats that no single species can overcome alone, but perhaps that's not the right way to think about it. Perhaps the question isn't how to be stronger individually, but how to be more creative together. How to combine our perspectives, our histories, our forgotten technologies into something new. He smiled, a very human expression that many in the audience were beginning to understand. You saw a primitive species clinging to obsolete weapons. We saw a galaxy full of brilliant people who had forgotten how to throw a rock. Both perspectives were true. Both were incomplete. That's why we need each other. In the years that followed, humanity's role in galactic affairs expanded dramatically. The railgun technology was freely shared, but more valuable than any weapon was the mindset that came with it. Human engineers were sought after not for their technical expertise, which remained modest by galactic standards, but for their willingness to question assumptions. The Karathi invited human consultants to examine their manufacturing processes, and were startled when a young engineer named Lisa Patterson suggested that a problem they had struggled with for centuries could be solved by a technique abandoned in their pre-industrial era. The Morvani, whose crystalline biology had always been considered incompatible with organic healing technologies, found new treatment options when Dr. Marcus Webb wondered aloud why no one had tried mechanical solutions instead. Not every human suggestion worked. Many were impractical, based on misunderstandings of alien technology or biology, but enough of them succeeded that the galaxy began to change how it thought about innovation. The phrase human question entered the lexicon of dozens of species, meaning an inquiry that challenged fundamental assumptions. Commander Hayes eventually retired from active service and took a position at the newly established Galactic Institute for Cross-Cultural Innovation, where humans and aliens worked together to rediscover forgotten technologies and challenge accepted wisdom. Dr. Santos became the Institute's chief researcher, her reputation for asking uncomfortable questions making her simultaneously the most valued and most feared member of the faculty. One evening, 5 years after the battle that had changed everything, Hayes sat in his office reviewing proposals from around the galaxy. A young Vorkin student had submitted a paper suggesting that the ancient Vorkin practice of chemical-based communication might have applications in quantum computing. It was a wild idea, almost certainly wrong, but it had the spark of that essential question: what if? His communication console chimed, and he found himself looking at the weathered face of High Arbiter Velmos, now retired from his position but still a respected voice in galactic affairs. "Commander," Velmos greeted him, Or should I say Director Hayes? Daniel is fine, old friend. What brings you to my corner of space? Velmos's silver scales rippled in what Hayes had learned to recognize as amusement. I've been thinking about that day in the assembly, when you first proposed your demonstration. Do you know what I thought when I heard your plan? That we were desperate primitives grasping at straws. Exactly. Velmos paused. I was so certain, so confident in my understanding of how warfare worked, how technology worked, how progress worked. And you proved me wrong with a weapon our ancestors would have recognized. Hayes leaned back in his chair. If it helps, we weren't sure it would work either. The theory was sound, but you never really know until you pull the trigger. That's what fascinates me about your species, Velmos said. You were willing to try, willing to risk looking foolish if you were wrong. The Karathi were not good at that. We've built our culture around certainty, around proven methods, around avoiding failure at all costs. And that's served you well for millennia, Hayes pointed out. Your civilization is stable, prosperous, advanced. Don't discount that. But also stagnant, Velmos admitted. We've been perfecting the same approaches for so long that we've forgotten how to develop new ones. You're humans, you're still young enough to make mistakes, still foolish enough to try things that probably won't work. That's a kind of wisdom, I think. A wisdom we lost somewhere along the way. Hayes considered this. Every species has something to offer. Humans can ask the questions, but we need partners who can help us understand which answers are worth pursuing. We need your experience, your caution, your depth of knowledge. Innovation without wisdom is just chaos. And wisdom without innovation is stagnation, Velmos completed the thought. Perhaps that's the real lesson of your railgun, Daniel. Not that kinetic weapons are better than energy weapons, but that different approaches can complement each other. That the galaxy is richer for having multiple perspectives. That sounds about right. They talked for another hour, two old warriors who had become friends through conflict and discovery. When the call ended, Hayes returned to his proposals, approving the Vorkin students' paper for further investigation. It probably wouldn't work. Most innovations didn't. But somewhere in the galaxy, some young being was asking a question that no one had thought to ask before, and that question might change everything. The galaxy had shuddered when humanity fired that first shot. Not because of the destruction it caused, but because of the certainties it shattered. In the end, the railgun was just a weapon, a tool, a means to an end. The real victory was in showing that the universe was larger than anyone had imagined, full of possibilities that had been dismissed and forgotten. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not by being the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced, but by being willing to ask the simplest question of all. What if we tried something different? And in a galaxy that had grown comfortable with its assumptions, that willingness was the most powerful weapon of all. 10 years after the demonstration, the Galactic Assembly unveiled a memorial at the site of the battle. It was a simple thing by galactic standards, a small asteroid fitted with a plaque and a preserved railgun slug, one of the original prototypes that had been tested before the Spirit of Liberty's deployment. The dedication ceremony drew representatives from every member species, including a delegation from the reformed Draxian Republic, which had emerged from the ruins of the hegemony with new leadership and a genuine desire for peaceful coexistence. Dr. Maria Santos, now gray-haired but as sharp-eyed as ever, read the inscription that would mark this place for generations to come. Here, on this date, the galaxy learned that progress is not a straight line, that wisdom can be found in forgotten places, that the newcomers among us might see what we have missed. Let this memorial remind all who pass that certainty is the enemy of discovery, and that the greatest victories come not from strength alone, but from the courage to question what we think we know. Below the words in smaller text was a phrase in the original English, one that had become something of a motto for the new era of galactic cooperation. Sometimes the answer is, try throwing a rock. The ceremony concluded with a moment of silence, observed by beings of 100 different shapes and sizes, all standing together in the void where one small ship had changed everything. They had come from different worlds, different histories, different ways of understanding the universe. But in that moment, They shared something more important than any technology or weapon. They shared hope. Hope that the future would bring challenges they couldn't predict, and faith that together they would find solutions they couldn't imagine. The galaxy was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of possibilities, waiting to be discovered by anyone brave enough to ask the right questions. Humanity had shown them that, and in showing them had earned something no amount of technology could provide, a place in the story of the cosmos, not as conquerors or dominators but as partners. As the species that reminded the galaxy how to wonder, Commander Daniel Hayes, watching the ceremony via holographic feed from his office at the Institute, raised a cup of coffee in silent salute. The galaxy had shuddered at that first shot. Now it was learning to dance, and the music was just beginning. The end.